Hi, everybody. It's Mary. Inevitably, when I'm training a course, this just happened this weekend on empathy and empathy knots. We're doing kind of like laying out these foundations for NVC. We get the question, but what if somebody wants advice, for example? We know the list of empathy knots. So advice, reassurance, those are sort of like the biggies that I think of first and foremost. But interrogation, asking lots and lots of questions, usually because you're curious and you just want to know and you care. But it can sometimes it can feel like somebody's being peppered with questions, colluding, like, oh yeah, you're right. Yes, that is awful. Oh my gosh, they are a jerk, whatever. Or spiritualizing, kind of giving them some sort of spiritual bypass, like, well, there's probably a better plan. These are the types of empathy knots that we pay attention to in conscious communication, in nonviolent communication. But it is true that sometimes people want advice, of course. And how do you know whether to stick with, recaps and reflections, guessing feelings, guessing needs, staying with them, or just answer the question and bring it back to you and tell them what you think, right? So there are three things that I like to pay attention to help me kind of make this, to discern. So one is, what's the implicit agreement in our relationship, right? So for example, if somebody's coming to me because I'm a consultant and they have questions that have to do with my area of expertise, then I'm much more likely to just go ahead and answer their questions when they ask them, right? This happens a lot at work where we're going to somebody else where, like that's the whole reason for the conversation. So in those cases, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, jump into the advice. That's, or the coaching or what have you. If you're somebody's mentor, sure. But just be mindful of the fact that sometimes, here's the second thing, it depends on how self-connected they seem to be, how upset they are. And yes, this is kind of your perception, your judgment. If somebody is really upset, and if a client comes to me, even though I know I might end up giving them advice, I will usually start out with some empathy first anyway, even if they even if they explicitly ask. I was going to say practically beg for it. It's a little overstatement there. But even if somebody's like, I don't know what to do, and they seem really distressed, then I'm probably going to be like, yeah, so, oh, yeah, it sounds like this is a complicated situation. Yeah. And you're hoping for some clarity. You right now, it's hard to weigh out which decision makes the most sense. Yeah. We might do some of that first before going into the actual advice itself, or any thoughts I might have based on what I know of them or whatever, right? So if they are a friend or somebody that I am not in some kind of an agreement with to give advice, then I'm much more likely to just stick with the empathy unless they go ahead and ask later, after they're a little bit more clear on kind of like, yeah, I'm just needing clarity. I'm needing hope. I'm just wanting to feel settled, what have you, right? So the second thing, the second is how self-connected, how upset they are. But the third thing is paying attention to power differentials. And, like it kind of goes back to like, what kind of a relationship is this, or what kind of an agreement do we have going into this conversation? But because I'm somebody's coach, they might take my advice over their own personal self-awareness if we're not too careful. That's part of why I'm mindful of sort of like just kind of reading the situation. So let me give you another example, like another little kind of prompt. So I don't know what happened. Like, I don't even know what's going on. Like an empathy knot that might happen in that situation, or might be kind of queued up, is interrogation. Is like asking lots of questions. Well, what did they say? What did you do? Like what was the setup? What was the scenario? Okay, then what'd you do next? There can be a way in which that's about my agenda and my need to know. And empathy might look like just kind of going like, oh, okay, like following what they say and don't say, even if I don't quite understand the big picture of what the conversation was like that they're upset about. I can just get the sense that like, yeah, you're frustrated, about this. And, just it sounds like there's something like you're really hoping will shift between you and your boss. And right now you don't know how that's going to happen. So especially in places where there's power differentials, I might be mindful of stepping back a little bit so that they can see if they can find their own wisdom. More often than not, when people are self-connected, that's when suddenly they have those little ideas like, oh, I could actually say that. Oh, you're right. I haven't ever specifically like named that explicitly. I could do that. Okay. So really, really being mindful. And then other times, because of the power differential, it's like, I might go ahead and answer the question. If I'm a teacher and a kid comes up really struggling, it might make sense for me to go ahead and just use a non-empathy response and say like, okay, here's how we go about doing this. Let me help you through it. Right. So there isn't really, in my mind, necessarily a right or wrong. The empathy knots are not bad. Empathy is not good. It's just that most of us have been sort of trained to do the empathy knots by default, whether they're wanted or not, whether there's a cue that they're welcome or supportive or not. And hopefully you can kind of start to feel into those nuances and know that there are other options you can try, or you can do some mix and match. Another biggie, this one isn't really work related necessarily, but like if somebody's like, oh, the world is a mess, right? So let yourself notice the difference in you when you want to collude and go like, it is, I can't even believe what's going on, blah, 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 or spiritualizing like, well, it's all going to work itself out. It's better not to get too upset about any one thing, so on. Let's maybe you should try a gratitude practice or whatever, versus empathy. Like, yeah, like there's a lot and it's overwhelming. Yeah, totally. Like just wanting even just like a little bit of hope that that these differences that we see amongst others that there's some capacity to potentially bridge them at some day, whatever it is that the empathy guesses, these are kind of made up out of thin air here, but like just letting yourself, at least if you are still in the habit of doing the empathy knots, just try a line or two of empathy, just even a teeny little bit like that before going ahead and answering the question. See what difference it makes. Report back. Thanks. Have a good one, everybody.